Look at this mess. Is this an officer or a college kid on spring break? The voice, rough as sand and salt, cut through the humid air of the training facility. I think we need to remind you what it means to be sharp, to be ready, the way we do it here. The hiss of a high-pressure hose erupted, and a torrent of ice-cold water slammed into Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova, plastering her dark hair to her skull and stealing her breath. But the water wasn't just washing away the desert dust from her uniform. It was the opening salvo in a war she had come to wage. A war to unearth a truth buried for a decade under the weight of medals and lies. This was her desperate, calculated revenge, and it had just begun. The blistering Nevada sun beat down on the sprawling Naval Special Warfare Training Compound, a place the operators called the Crucible. It was a landscape of baked earth, shimmering heat haze, and brutalist concrete structures designed to forge warriors or break men. The air, thick with the smell of cordite and sweat, clung to everything. Just moments ago, a live-fire training exercise had concluded. The frantic ballet of muzzle flashes and controlled explosions had ceased, leaving only the ringing in the ears of the young SEAL candidates and the rasp of their labored breathing. Situation secure. All teams, hold position. Weapons check. Report status. The voice that crackled over the comms was low, devoid of emotion, and carried an authority that could freeze the desert heat. The young operators, muscles screaming and lungs burning, resisted the urge to collapse. The owner of that voice, Commander Jackson Thorne, stepped out from the observation tower. At 6'3", he was a monument carved from granite and grit. His perfectly starched desert fatigues, adorned with the trident that marked him as a Navy SEAL, seemed immune to the dust and disarray around him. They called him Iron Thorne, and the nickname was an understatement. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the training ground with an unnerving intensity. They didn't just see, they dissected, analyzed, and judged. Below him, the breach structure, a mock-up of a terrorist compound, still trickled smoke. The final day of this advanced training cycle had been a textbook success. The teams had infiltrated, eliminated all targets, and secured the objective with 0 simulated casualties. It was a flawless operation. But Thorne's face showed no hint of satisfaction. His gaze swept across the area, a predator searching for the slightest imperfection. Where his eyes landed, instructors and candidates alike tensed, bracing for impact. For Commander Thorne, success was the baseline expectation. Perfection in the process that was the only currency he accepted. His gaze locked onto a breacher team, specifically, its young leader, a lieutenant named Galloway. Lieutenant Galloway. Yes, Commander, the young officer, barely 25, snapped to attention, his face smeared with camouflage paint and sweat. Thorne gestured with his chin toward the demolished doorway the team had entered through. Your charge placement, it was 2 inches too high. Sir, the breach was effective. We entered without obstruction. Effective. Thorne's voice dropped, becoming even more dangerous. Effective gets you through the door. Perfection keeps your point man from eating a face full of shrapnel. A ricochet from that high placement could have taken out your number 2 before he even crossed the threshold. In a real fight, your man would be bleeding out on the doorstep because you were effective instead of perfect. I am sorry, Commander. It won't happen again. There is no next time for a dead man, Lieutenant. Thorne's voice was as cold as the deep ocean. He stepped closer, not raising his voice, but the intensity made Galloway flinch. Perfection isn't a goal here. It's the bare minimum for survival. This is the most dangerous job on the planet. In my command, good enough is a death sentence. Do you understand me? Crystal, Commander. This was the world Commander Thorne had built. In the 3 years he had commanded this advanced training group, he had transformed it. He'd ripped out complacency and bureaucratic laziness by the roots, subordinating everything to 2 principles: brutal realism and absolute victory. Under his leadership, his graduates were considered the most prepared operators in the entire special warfare community. But beneath that legendary reputation, the command was rotting from the inside. The operators were ground down by a relentless operational tempo, a zero-defect mentality that punished the slightest human error, and a suffocating culture of silence. Thorne's obsession with perfection extended beyond the battlefield, invading the personal lives of his men, demanding a level of conformity that choked the very individuality that made them effective warriors, but no complaint ever surfaced. The iron-fisted control and surveillance Thorne had implemented made his command a fortress of silence. No crack, no whisper of dissent was ever allowed to escape. He believed his fortress was impenetrable. He was certain it was perfect. Later, back in his Spartan office, Thorne was reviewing the after-action reports, the room immaculate, every pen and paper aligned with geometric precision. A knock at the door broke his concentration. His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Price, entered with a look of urgency. "Commander, we have an unscheduled visitor from JAG headquarters." And, Thorne asked, not looking up from his paperwork. Nothing was allowed to break his focus. "It's a formal command climate investigation, sir. A team is coming, tomorrow." Thorne finally lifted his head, a faint line creasing his brow. This wasn't a routine inspection. A targeted investigation from the Judge Advocate General's Corps meant someone had filed a serious complaint that had gone up the chain of command. "The lead investigator is arriving personally," Price added, his voice hesitant, a Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova. Thorne let out a short, dismissive grunt. JAG. When did they start letting lawyers out of their air-conditioned offices? He imagined some paper pusher, someone who'd never tasted desert sand or felt the shockwave of a breach. "What's the story on this Rostova?" "Not much, sir. She's not from the community. A fast burner, though they say she's tenacious. Nicknames the scalpel for how she dissects cases. A female lawyer, a scalpel." The image that formed in Thorne's mind was one of prejudice. She'd gotten where she was through politics, not grit. A desk jockey who had no concept of the realities of combat, now coming to pass judgment on his perfect war machine. The thought was laughable. "Interesting," Thorne said, a humorless smile touching his lips. "Don't worry, Price, you can't find fault in a flawless machine. In fact, this is an opportunity. A chance to show these Pentagon lawyers what real excellence looks like." He leaned back in his chair, radiating absolute confidence. "Pass the word to every man. Tomorrow, we put on a show. This isn't an investigation. It's a demonstration of what it takes to be the best. We're going to show this scalpel what it means to be a SEAL." His order spread like wildfire. That night, the lights in the crucible burned late. Operators, exhausted from the day's training, meticulously cleaned weapons that were already spotless. Instructors triple-checked training logs. Everything had to be perfect. Not a single speck of dust could mar the surface of Iron Thorne's fortress. The next morning, the compound was a picture of military perfection. From the razor-sharp salute of the gate guard to the synchronized cadence of operators on their morning run, everything was straight out of a recruiting poster. Commander Thorne stood in front of his headquarters in his dress whites, the uniform pressed to a knife's edge. Behind him, his staff stood in nervous formation. He had personally inspected the barracks before sunrise, checking for dust under the bunks. His fortress was immaculate. Right on schedule, a black sedan followed by a military SUV rolled up to the headquarters. Officers from the JAG Corps, dressed in their own service uniforms, stepped out of the SUV and rendered a crisp salute to Thorne. "Commander Thorne, Lieutenant Miller, JAG Corps, we're here to assist Lieutenant Commander Rostova with the command investigation." "Welcome to the Crucible, Lieutenant," Thorne replied curtly, his eyes fixed on the rear door of the sedan. The door opened, and all eyes turned. The person who emerged was a woman in a crisp, tailored service dress uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, regulation bun. Her face was bare of makeup, her expression composed and analytical. An aura of cool, intellectual confidence surrounded her. This was Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova. Thorne's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. Instead of approaching him immediately, the senior officer on site, she paused, her eyes slowly scanning the compound, taking in the perfect formations, the gleaming equipment, the sheer overwhelming display of military might. To Thorne, this was not a sign of respect or awe, it was a slight, a challenge. A lawyer from headquarters, acting like she owns the place. His internal monologue was laced with contempt. Doesn't even know basic protocol. Pride, sharp and ugly, rose in his chest. He strode toward her, his staff watching in stunned silence. No one dared stop him. "Commander," he said, his voice a low growl. Her name. He didn't use her rank. Eva Rostova turned her head slowly, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were deep and calm, an unreadable abyss of cool intelligence. But Thorne didn't see the depth, he saw a challenge. His eyes, however, weren't focused on hers. They were focused on her perfect, polished black shoes. "You're a long way from a courtroom, counselor." The air crackled, the visiting JAG officers paled. Thorne didn't stop. "Here we deal in a different kind of reality. A reality of sweat and cold and pressure. You can't understand this place by reading a report. You can't judge my men from behind a desk." He took a step closer. "Before you start looking for cracks in my command, maybe you should see if you can even handle the pressure." He turned to his senior chief, a hulking man named Graves. "Chief, escort the lieutenant commander to the pool. Get her a set of fatigues. I think she needs a practical demonstration of our command climate." "Commander," Lieutenant Miller, her subordinate, gasped. "You can't be serious, she's—" Thorne's glare silenced him. "In my command," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his eyes locked on Eva's. "We demonstrate, we don't talk." A moment later, Thorne stood on the edge of the Olympic-sized combat training pool, the infamous site of drown-proofing, where SEAL candidates are pushed to the absolute limits of their ability to function under water-induced panic. Eva Rostova stood before him, now clad in borrowed, ill-fitting fatigues. Her composure was unshaken, but a flicker of something cold and calculating had entered her eyes. "The foundation of this command, Commander Rostova, is controlling chaos. It's about functioning when your body or instincts are screaming for you to quit." He pointed to the water. "Your hands and feet will be bound. You will perform a series of tasks on the pool floor. It's simple, don't panic." He was trying to break her, to humiliate her in front of his men, to prove that this outsider, this woman, this lawyer, had no right to judge them. Eva said nothing. She simply walked to the edge of the pool, allowed the instructor to bind her wrists and ankles, and, without a moment's hesitation, slipped into the cold, clear water. The test began. She bobbed to the surface, took a breath, sank, and propelled herself across the bottom. She retrieved a face mask with her teeth. She performed the underwater somersaults. The gathered SEALs watched in stunned silence. They expected panic. They expected failure. They saw precision, calm, methodical, relentless precision. She wasn't a SEAL, but she had the one thing Thorne hadn't counted on: unbreakable will. As the final evolution finished, she surfaced, treading water effortlessly, her chest barely heaving. She looked directly at Thorne, her dark eyes piercing through his smug certainty. For the first time, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. But it was too late. He had taken the bait. He had assaulted a visiting officer, not physically, but with a flagrant abuse of his authority. He had tried to intimidate her, and in doing so, had given her all the power. She swam to the ladder and pulled herself from the pool, water streaming from the fatigues. She stood before him, dripping, hair in disarray, but her dignity was a shield of armor. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or anger. It was the cold, satisfied smile of a hunter whose prey had just walked straight into the kill zone. "Commander Thorne," she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the stunned silence, "your hospitality is memorable. Thank you for the demonstration." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You've shown me exactly what I needed to see." She turned, her back straight, and walked past him, leaving him standing by the pool, the scent of chlorine in the air mingling with the sudden, chilling stench of his own catastrophic miscalculation. This wasn't an investigation anymore. This was a dissection, and Eva Rostova, the scalpel, was ready to make her first cut. The air in Commander Thorne's office was heavy, charged with a tension thicker than the Nevada heat outside. The performance at the pool, the act of ritual humiliation that had backfired so spectacularly, felt like a distant dream. Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova sat opposite Thorne's polished mahogany desk, her wet hair now combed back, her composure an icy fortress. The bizarre, dripping state of her uniform only amplified her unnerving presence, making her seem surreal, otherworldly. Her eyes seemed to see through everything in the room, meticulously arranged awards, the spotless surfaces, the framed photos of decorated SEAL teams, but she showed no interest in any of it. Commander Thorne was no longer in his element. The certainty he held on the battlefield and the training ground felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His world, a world of absolute control, had been invaded by an unpredictable variable. He struggled to regain command of the situation, to reassert the dominance that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. Should he apologize? The thought was absurd. A commander apologizing to a lieutenant commander. His pride wouldn't allow it. Besides, her eyes, they weren't the eyes of someone who would accept an apology. They were the eyes of someone settling a score. He had to regain control. He was still the commanding officer here. Clinging to that fact, he retrieved the voluminous briefing binder his staff had prepared through the night, a testament to the command's flawless record. He placed it on the desk between them. "Lieutenant Commander, as you can see from the prepared brief." "That won't be necessary, Commander." Eva cut him off. She didn't even glance at the binder. She simply slid it to the far edge of the desk with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. The casual dismissal was like a physical blow. A night's work by a dozen men, the culmination of his command's supposed perfection, treated like garbage. "Commander Thorne," she began, her tone changing from formal to something more pointed, more personal. "What do you believe is the most critical asset in this command? The advanced weaponry, the operational budget, the unwavering support from Naval Special Warfare Command?" The question caught him off guard. He defaulted to doctrine. "While all components are vital, the single most critical asset is the operator. The man in the arena, our ability to fight and win." "Is that so?" Eva replied, a single, sharp syllable. She rose from her chair. "Then let's examine the foundation of that asset." She walked toward the door. "Follow me." She didn't lead him to the armory, filled with the world's most advanced weapons. She didn't go to the Tactical Operations Center, where missions were planned with microscopic precision. Instead, she led him to a dusty, forgotten corner of the main administration building. A place where a simple, gray metal box was bolted to the wall. The command's official suggestion box. A thin layer of fine desert dust coated its lid. While every other surface in the command was polished to a mirror shine, this box had been left to the slow passage of time. "Open it," she commanded. Thorne signaled to his XO, who fumbled for a key and unlocked the box. The metal door swung open with a reluctant squeak. The inside was completely empty, not a single slip of paper, not one anonymous complaint or suggestion. Thorne felt a surge of relief, seizing the opportunity to spin the narrative. "As you can see, Lieutenant Commander, my men are satisfied. Morale is at an all-time high. It's a testament to my leadership style. They have no complaints." Before the words had fully left his mouth, Eva's response came like a whip crack. "They're not satisfied, Commander. They've given up." "What are you talking about?" "They've learned that speaking up changes nothing. Or worse, they're afraid of the consequences of speaking up. An empty suggestion box isn't a sign of a healthy command. It's the clearest possible symptom of a command gripped by fear." She ran a gloved finger along the inside bottom of the box. It came away black with grime. "This level of dust, it hasn't been opened in at least a year. Despite regulations stating it must be checked weekly by the Command Master Chief." Thorne's face hardened into a mask of stone. She was bypassing his fortress walls, ignoring the polished cannons and high towers, and had immediately found a crack in the foundation. She wasn't using force, she was using logic, facts, and his own regulations to dismantle his illusion of perfection. Next, she went to the chow hall. It was before the lunch rush, but the kitchen staff was already on high alert. Eva scanned the day's menu, then walked directly into the food stores. She asked the supply chief for the inventory logs, then pointed to a specific item. "The steak for tonight's dinner. The log says you received a shipment of 200 pounds of prime ribeye this morning. You're scheduled to use 150 pounds. Let's verify the remaining 50 pounds. The supply chief's face went pale. When the freezer was opened and the remaining boxes were placed on a scale, they weighed only 21 pounds. 29 pounds of prime steak had vanished. Siphoned off, likely sold by a corrupt staff member. Eva didn't berate the trembling chief. She simply turned her cool gaze back to Thorne. "Our operators pushed their bodies to the absolute limit, defending this country. And the food meant to fuel them, where did it go, Commander? Do you think men fighting for scraps can fight a war?" Her investigation continued in this manner all day. She ignored the polished surface and dug relentlessly at the unseen rot. She didn't care about combat readiness scores or marksmanship qualifications. She cared about the basics, the voices of the men, the quality of their food, the integrity of the supply chain. And everywhere she looked, she found the corruption and fear that festered in the shadow of Thorne's obsession with a narrow, brutal form of perfection. She never raised her voice. She never made threats. She simply held up the regulations and the facts, and in their clear light, his command was exposed as a hollow shell. That quiet, methodical process was more suffocating to Thorne than any shouting match. By late afternoon, Commander Thorne had completely lost his composure. The arrogant, confident leader from the morning was gone, replaced by a man cornered and fighting for his life. He finally understood. Eva Rostova wasn't here on a random investigation. She had a target. From the very beginning, she had a specific, clear objective, and he was it. The incident at the pool wasn't the cause of her investigation. It was just a trigger she had expertly pulled. She hadn't come to punish him for that. She had used the authority that incident gave her to dig for something much deeper, much darker. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Eva summoned Thorne back to his office. She stood by the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "The desert has a way of hiding things, doesn't it?" she said, her voice soft, almost conversational. "The wind and the sand, they can cover anything. A mistake, a body, a lie." Thorne's blood ran cold. The words, the imagery, they triggered something deep inside him, a memory locked away in a part of his mind he never visited. A Pandora's box sealed for 10 years. A flash of memory, sharp as broken glass, the blinding chaos of a firefight in a dusty Afghan village, the desperate screams over the radio, the face of a young operator, his eyes wide with fear and confusion, and then the silence, swallowed by the dust and the deafening roar of war. He clenched his fists, his palms slick with sweat. No, it's a coincidence. She can't possibly know. As he fought to control the rising panic, Eva turned from the window. Her eyes were colder, deeper than before. "Commander, tomorrow's inspection won't take place here. We need to go somewhere else." "Where?" His voice was hoarse. "North," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "To the place where the real test is. The place your command is truly meant to protect." She walked to the large tactical map on his wall and tapped a specific set of coordinates in a remote, mountainous region of Afghanistan. A place now known only by a grid reference. But Thorne knew it by another name. It was the site of Operation Nomad Fury. His eyes widened in horror. It was the place where Petty Officer Leo Vance died. Eva Rostova added one last thing, her voice a final, damning verdict. "I've been reviewing the after-action reports from 10 years ago. Especially from a mission that went sideways during a sandstorm." She looked him directly in the eye. "Your name was all over it, Lieutenant Thorne. Along with some very creative storytelling. The past was no longer buried. It had been clawed out of its shallow grave by the woman in the dripping fatigues, the woman whose brother he had left for dead. The ghost had returned, and the walls of Iron Thorne's fortress were beginning to crumble into dust. In the pre-dawn darkness, a single, black SUV departed the crucible, its headlights cutting through the cool desert air. It headed for a private airfield, its destination a military transport plane waiting to fly them halfway across the world. The destination was Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, and from there, a helicopter flight into the mountains, into the past. Inside the SUV, the silence was absolute. Commander Thorne sat beside Lieutenant Commander Rostova. An armed JAG officer sat in the front passenger seat, a silent, imposing presence. Thorne stared out the window at the featureless landscape, but he didn't see it. He saw the swirling dust of a decade-old sandstorm. His heart hammered against his ribs with a grim, unsteady rhythm. He hadn't slept. Eva's word-screed of storytelling had shattered the lock on his memory. The carefully constructed narrative he'd lived with for 10 years had fractured, and the ugly truth was seeping through the cracks. The scenes from that day, the ones he had brutally suppressed, played over and over in his mind. His world of perfect control had been breached by the one variable he could never command, the past. He risked a sideways glance at Eva. She was perfectly still, her gaze fixed forward. In the dim light of the dashboard, her profile was as sharp and unyielding as a blade. Her ruined hair, still not perfectly dry, was a stark reminder of his arrogance. He now saw it, not as a sign of his power, but of her sacrificial, calculated move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. How much did she know? Was this all just a hunch, a fishing expedition? Or did she have proof The uncertainty was a new kind of torture, worse than any physical hardship he had ever endured. He was no longer the hunter, he was the prey, being led back to the scene of his original crime by the one person he should have feared most. Hours later, the Black Hawk helicopter banked hard, the rotor wash kicking up clouds of brown dust. Below them, the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Hindu Kush stretched to the horizon. The helicopter set down in a small, abandoned forward operating base, a collection of sand-filled barriers and skeletal wooden structures. A decade ago, this had been their launch point for Operation Nomad Fury. Stepping out onto the ground, Thorne felt the familiar thinness of the high-altitude air. The wind howled through the ruined buildings, a mournful sound that echoed the ghosts of the men who had been stationed here. He never imagined he would set foot in this place again. In his relentless climb to the top, the past was a liability to be buried, not revisited. Eva walked toward the crumbling remains of the command post without a word. Thorne followed, a man in a trance. The smell of dust and decay filled his nostrils. Every step was a step back in time. The mess hall, the barracks, the armory. This was where he had forged his reputation for ruthlessness. This was where the monster had been born. She stopped at a low, stone wall at the edge of the base. It overlooked a steep, rocky ravine. Beyond it, a labyrinth of narrow, treacherous valleys snaked through the mountains. That was the place. The present-day landscape blurred, and Thorne was plunged back into the chaos of that day 10 years ago. 2013, Paktika Province, Afghanistan. Lieutenant Jackson Thorne, a young, ambitious SEAL officer, was hungry. He craved recognition, honor, and the fast track to command. Fresh from a string of successful missions, he felt invincible, his belief in his own abilities absolute. That afternoon, the sky turned a sickly yellow. A massive sandstorm, a haboob, was rolling in from the south, far faster than forecasted. The command center at Bagram issued a direct order. All units return to base immediately. Sir, we need to pull back now, his seasoned senior chief, Master Chief Petty Officer Franklin, had urged. We get caught in that, we'll be blind and deaf. But to the young Lieutenant Thorne, Franklin's caution sounded like weakness. A senior enlisted man questioning the judgment of an officer. It rankled him. Just then, a fragmented piece of intelligence came over the radio. A high-value target, a notorious bombmaker, was potentially holed up in a small village just 2 clicks deeper into the valley system. It was a long shot, a ghost of a lead. Thorne, his commander's voice crackled over the comms, distorted by static. The storm is a problem, but a storm can also provide cover. The call is yours, Lieutenant. I'll trust your judgment on the ground. That was all the encouragement he needed. This was his moment. To snatch a high-value target from the teeth of a storm, the commendations would write themselves. His name would be on everyone's lips at command. We're pushing forward, he announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. Gear up, we move in 5. Franklin's face was a mask of grim disbelief, but an order was an order. The men in his platoon exchanged uneasy glances. Among them was Petty Officer Leo Vance. They called him Cub because, at 21, he was the youngest on the team. He was brave, but still green. In his armor carrier, he kept a worn photo of his older sister, Eva. Before deploying, she'd made him promise to be careful, to trust his gut, and to never take a stupid risk. The team moved into the storm. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of roaring wind and blinding sand. Visibility dropped to near zero. Navigation became guesswork. Thorne, driven by a desperate need for a victory, pushed the team harder, faster. Stay close, don't lose sight, he yelled over the wind. That's when it happened. As they navigated a narrow ledge above the ravine, the enemy opened up. A sudden, ferocious ambush. Muzzle flashes appeared like angry fireflies in the swirling dust. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for cover, their shouts swallowed by the storm. In the confusion, a call came over the radio, panicked and young. Man down, Cub is hit. Leo Vance, caught in the open, had taken a round to the leg. He was exposed, bleeding, and pinned down. Thorne saw him, 100 yards away, a dark shape in the orange haze. The tactical calculus in his head was instant and brutal. Rescuing Vance would mean exposing the entire team to withering fire. They would be trapped, blind, and likely wiped out. The mission capturing the Huft would fail. His career would be over before it began. But abandoning a man, it was the ultimate sin. "We gotta get him." Their corpsman, Marcus Alvarez, screamed, already moving toward Vance. Thorne grabbed him. "No, hold position. We lay down suppressive fire and break contact." "Sir, we don't leave a man behind. That's Cub out there." "I said break contact. That's an order, Doc." Thorne's voice was pure ice. He made a choice. He chose the mission. He chose his career. He chose himself. He sacrificed the Cub. He told himself it was the hard but necessary choice of a commander. He told himself Vance was likely already dead. He ordered the retreat. As they pulled back, the sound of the firefight faded, replaced only by the howl of the storm. He wrote the after-action report himself. Petty Officer Leo Vance, separated from the team in the storm, had panicked under fire and broken cover, resulting in his fatal wounding. A tragic loss, but the result of a rookie's mistake. The story was clean, it was believable, and it preserved his future. Back in 2023, Lieutenant Commander Rostova's voice pulled him from the nightmare. Commander Thorne. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his breathing ragged. He looked at the woman before him. She was standing at the edge of the overlook, the same spot where he'd made his fateful decision, staring down into the empty ravine. She turned to face him, her eyes holding no emotion, which made them terrifying. "The storms are still bad out here, I hear." Her voice was carried on the wind. "A good place to lose things." She took a step toward him, like the truth. In that instant, Thorne knew. She knew everything. This was no longer a game of cat and mouse. This was a final judgment. From the pocket of her uniform, she pulled a small, laminated photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. It showed to smiling teenagers. A young man with a goofy grin, his arm slung around his fiercely protective older sister. It was Leo Vance and a 20-year-old Eva Rostova. "My brother," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a decade of grief. "This was taken the day before he left for boot camp. He told me he was going to be a hero. He joined the Navy to be like the men he read about in books, men with honor." She held the photo out for him. Thorne couldn't bring himself to look at it. "He died a hero, but you didn't write that in your report, did you? You wrote that he panicked. You wrote that my brother, the bravest person I ever knew, was a coward." Thorne's world tilted on its axis. Every lie, every carefully constructed defense, shattered. She wasn't just an investigator. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was the Cub's sister. And she had spent 10 years hunting him. "You didn't just leave my brother to die in that ravine, Lieutenant Thorne," she said, her voice now trembling with a decade of suppressed fury. "You left your honor there with him. You left your soul. I'm here to collect them both." It was a declaration of war. The ghost of the young man he had sacrificed was standing before him, wearing his sister's face. And Thorne's iron will, the foundation of his entire life, began to rust, corrode, and crumble into nothing. The flight back from Afghanistan was an agonizing eternity in a pressurized tomb. Commander Thorne was no longer the apex predator of the Crucible. He was a caged animal, stripped of his power, his reputation, and his future. The stunning revelation that Eva Rostova was Leo Vance's sister had detonated the last of his defenses. The past 10 years of his life, a relentless climb built on a foundation of lies, were collapsing into a sinkhole of his own making. She was not just a JAG officer. She was an avenger, armed with a decade of focused, patient hatred. Back in his office at the Crucible, he locked the door, tore the commander's insignia from his collar, and slammed it onto his desk. His perfectly ordered world was in chaos. He would not go down without a fight. Rummaging in his bottom desk drawer, he found a bottle of single malt scotch, a gift he'd never opened. He poured a heavy measure and drank it in one searing gulp. The liquor burned a path down his throat, a welcome fire in the icy landscape of his fear. It cleared his head, replacing panic with cold, desperate calculation. "There's no physical proof," he thought, the words a mantra against the rising tide of doom. It was 10 years ago, in the middle of a firefight, in a sandstorm. Her word against a decorated SEAL commander's. The official report is solid. The witnesses are scattered. It's her grief talking, nothing more. The key was the one other person who knew the unvarnished truth. The one person whose testimony could corroborate Eva's story. The team corpsman, Marcus "Doc" Alvarez. If Alvarez talked, it was over. Using a secure, personal laptop, Thorne bypassed official channels, calling in old favors with contacts in naval intelligence. Within an hour, he had what he needed: Marcus Alvarez's current address and phone number. He'd left the Navy 8 years ago and was living a quiet life. The fate of Iron Thorne now rested on the silence of a man he had bullied into submission a decade ago. Miles away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in San Diego, Marcus Alvarez was trying to eat dinner with his family. Now a civilian paramedic, his face was etched with the quiet exhaustion of a man who spends his days confronting trauma. The memory of Operation Nomad Fury was a ghost that lived in his house, a scar on his soul. He had nightmares of the sandstorm, of Leo Vance's voice on the radio, of Thorne's cold, hard eyes ordering the retreat. He had tried to bury the guilt under the routine of a normal life: a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage bit. It was always there, a low-grade fever of shame. His phone buzzed, a blocked number. "Hello, Doc, it's Thorne." Marcus Alvarez froze, a fork halfway to his mouth. The voice, unchanged by the years, was a key unlocking a vault of horrors he thought he had sealed forever. The voice of the officer who had made him a coward. "Figured you were doing well," Thorne said, his tone deceptively casual, like an old friend catching up. "Listen, I was just thinking about the old days. About some of the tough calls we had to make. We went through some heavy stuff together, you and I. You were a good man in a tight spot." The words were coated in a veneer of camaraderie, but underneath, Marcus could feel the cold steel of a threat. "I was thinking, for all your good service, maybe you're due a little something. A gesture of my appreciation." Marcus couldn't speak. Appreciation. It sounded like a down payment on his silence. That's not necessary, sir," he finally stammered. "I've moved on. I don't remember much from back then." "Good." Thorne's voice sharpened slightly. "That's for the best. Forgetting is a healthy thing. We all just live our quiet lives, and nobody gets hurt. I'll be in touch." The line went dead. Marcus sat motionless, the phone clutched in his hand, his dinner forgotten. The past he had run from had just kicked down his front door. Meanwhile, Thorne exhaled, a ragged breath of relief. He believed he had Alvarez under control. But his relief was short-lived. A new summons from Rostova. This time, they met in a sterile, windowless conference room. On the table between them were several thin files and the worn photograph of Leo and Eva. Thorne remained standing, a statue of defiance. Eva ignored his posture. She pushed a stack of signed affidavits across the table. They were sworn statements from every surviving member of his old SEAL platoon. She had spent the last several years tracking them down, one by one. "They all remember, Commander," she said, her voice soft but relentless. "They remember the sandstorm that appeared out of nowhere. They remember your order to push forward, against the senior chief's advice. They remember you were chasing a ghost. The testimonies were circumstantial, but woven together, they created a tapestry of reckless ambition." She pushed the photograph of her and Leo forward again. "This is from my brother's last letter. He wrote, 'Sis, my new lieutenant is the real deal. Hard as nails. I want to be just like him someday. He trusted you, Thorne. He idolized you. And you fed him to the wolves to protect your career.'" Her voice, though quiet, was filled with the raw grief of a decade. As a shattered Thorne stumbled out of the conference room, his phone rang. It was Marcus Alvarez. His voice was a panicked whisper. "Commander, someone was just here, at my house." To investigators they said Lieutenant Commander Rostova sent them. Thorne's blood turned to ice. She was always 1 step ahead, 10 steps ahead. His clumsy attempt to intimidate Alvarez was an amateur move in a grandmaster's chess match. His entire world was imploding. Reason and control had failed him. Now, only brute force remained. He called Alvarez back. The friendly veneer was gone, replaced by raw, undisguised menace. "Alvarez, you listen to me, and you listen good. Whatever that bitch told you, you don't know anything. You say you don't remember. You say the storm was too confusing. If you say one word, I swear to God, I won't be the only one who goes down." Then he crossed a line from which there was no return. "I know where you live, Marcus. I know you have a daughter and a son. Beautiful family. You want to see them grow up. You will keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me?" Through the phone, he could hear Alvarez's ragged, terrified breathing. Thorne, the decorated warrior, the leader of men, had become a common thug, making threats against a man's family. He was so consumed by the instinct to survive that he didn't realize what he had just done. He didn't realize that Eva Rostova's investigators were still in Marcus Alvarez's living room. He didn't realize that his entire tirade, every single venomous word, was being captured by a small, high-fidelity digital recorder sitting on the coffee table. Eva's pursuit hadn't begun last week. It began the day she read her brother's final letter and saw the glaring inconsistencies in the official report. She sacrificed a promising career path, transferring to the JAG Corps, a place where she could learn the mechanisms of military justice. For 10 years, she had quietly, patiently, and meticulously built her case, gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She waited until Thorne was at the height of his power, in a command of his own making, where his arrogance would make him vulnerable. Her investigators hadn't threatened Alvarez, they had offered him a choice. They showed him the files, the testimonies, the evidence they had collected. They offered him and his family full protection. You can help us expose a lie and finally unburden yourself of the guilt you've carried for a decade, they told him. Or you can live in fear of that man for the rest of your life. Thorne's phone call wasn't a setback, it was the final, crucial piece of her puzzle. The checkmate move she had been waiting for him to make. He had just placed the noose around his own neck. The dawn of the final day broke over the crucible, pale and unforgiving. Lieutenant Commander Rostova had summoned all senior officers and chiefs of the command to the main briefing hall for her final outbrief. Commander Thorne, his face a haggard mask of sleeplessness, sat at the head of the table. He was clinging to a single, desperate hope. Without a confession from Alvarez, without definitive proof, this would end with a letter of reprimand, a forced retirement, perhaps. His career would be over, but his freedom would be intact. He convinced himself that his threat had been enough to guarantee Alvarez's silence. Eva stood at the podium. She calmly presented the findings of her investigation: supply fraud, the falsified training reports, the culture of fear. Thorne's command was being systematically dismantled in front of his subordinates, but the one topic he dreaded, Operation Nomad Ferry, remained unmentioned. A sliver of hope flickered within him. This concludes the formal findings of the command climate investigation, Eva announced. Disciplinary actions will be handled through official channels. It seemed to be over. A collective, quiet sigh of relief went through the room. Thorne's shoulders relaxed by a fraction of an inch. Then, Eva paused. She looked up from her notes and made eye contact with every single person in the room, her gaze finally landing on Thorne. "Oh," she said, her voice casual, yet carrying an electric charge. "There is one last item, an audio file I think you all should hear." She clicked a button on a wireless remote. A crackle of static filled the room, followed by a familiar voice, twisted by rage and desperation. "If you say one word, I swear to God, I won't be the only one who goes down. I know where you live. Marcus, you want to see them grow up, you will keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me?" Thorne's own voice, his own vile threat, echoing through the chamber. The assembled officers stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. The iron-willed leader they had both feared and respected was a man who threatened families. Thorne's face drained of all color. And it wasn't over. The main doors at the back of the hall swung open. 2 Navy masters at arms entered, escorting a civilian between them. A man with a pale, haunted face, but whose eyes now held a glimmer of resolve. Marcus Alvarez. Eva's eyes locked with Thorne's. They were the eyes of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "I believe this man has a statement to make. A statement about what really happened during a sandstorm 10 years ago. The trap had sprung. There was no way out. The lies that had been his shield for a decade had just become the bars of his cage. The weight of 10 years was about to come crashing down." The briefing hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. As Marcus Alvarez walked to the podium, every eye in the room was on him. He took a deep, shaky breath and began to speak, his voice cracking with the weight of a decade of silence. He told them everything: Thorne's reckless decision to push into the storm against advice, the ambush, the moment Leo Cub Vance was hit. He recounted, in agonizing detail, how Vance was still alive, calling for help over the radio when Lieutenant Thorne made the call to abandon him. He confessed to his own cowardice, to falsifying the medical report under Thorne's direct, menacing order. "I was young, I was scared," Alvarez choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I let my brother die out there, and I helped his killer cover it up. I am so sorry." He collapsed into a chair, his body racked with sobs, the sound of a man's soul breaking open. The room was a sea of stunned, horrified faces. The legend of Iron Thorne had evaporated, replaced by the ugly reality of a man who had sacrificed one of his own for personal ambition. Suddenly, Thorne, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, shot to his feet. His eyes were wild, crazed. "Lies! It's all lies!" he roared, his voice cracking. "She's poisoned him. This woman Rostova, this is a personal vendetta. She's using this broken man to settle a family grudge. It's a conspiracy to destroy me, to destroy the reputation of this command." It was the last, desperate thrashing of a dying animal. He was about to lunge toward Eva, his control completely shattered, when she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. Her expression was not one of anger, but of pity. "A conspiracy, Commander?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Then perhaps you can explain this." She clicked the remote again. The projector screen behind her lit up, displaying a bank statement. It showed a failed wire transfer for $50,000 from a private account belonging to Jackson Thorne to an account owned by Marcus Alvarez, attempted the previous day. His gesture of appreciation, his bribe, the final nail in his coffin. Thorne stared at the screen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was utterly, completely defeated. Eva walked slowly from the podium until she stood directly in front of him. In the silent room, her voice was a clear, cold bell, meant only for him. "I have one last question for you, Commander Thorne. Do you know what the last words my brother said were? The last thing he transmitted before his radio went silent." Thorne stared at her blankly. "He didn't curse you. He didn't scream for help." Her own voice broke for the first time, thick with unshed tears. "He said, 'Tell the lieutenant I'm sorry. He was dying because of your orders, and in his last moments, he was apologizing for letting you down.' What kind of man, what kind of monster takes that loyalty and throws it away like trash?" Something inside Jackson Thorne finally snapped. The iron facade, the layers of arrogance and denial he had worn for a decade, shattered into a million pieces. The man beneath was not a monster, but something far more pathetic, a scared, ambitious young lieutenant who had made a terrible choice and had been running from it ever since. A raw, guttural sound escaped his lips. The image of Leo Vance's young, earnest face flashed in his mind. "I want to be just like him someday." He had taken that boy's life and his honor and built a career on top of them. No, it was a primal scream of self-loathing. He collapsed to his knees on the cold, hard floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. "I did it, I killed him," he wept, the words torn from his soul. "I left him there, I was afraid, so afraid it would ruin me, oh God, I killed the kid." Commander Iron Thorne, the unbreakable leader of men, confessed his sins in a storm of wretched, broken sobs in front of the very men who had once revered him. As his cries echoed through the briefing hall, the rear doors opened again. The masters at arms stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate. In their hands, they held a pair of cold, steel handcuffs. The age of iron was over. 2 years later, in 2025, Jackson Thorne had lost everything. A court-martial found him guilty on all charges: dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years in the military prison at Leavenworth and stripped of all rank and honor. He did not appeal. In prison, he became a cautionary tale, a fallen idol who spent his days in quiet reflection, finally confronting the ghost he had run from for so long. Back at the Crucible, a new wind was blowing. The new commander fostered a culture of transparency and trust, understanding that true strength came from integrity, not fear. The suffocating pressure lifted. Laughter was heard in the hallways again. And the dusty, forgotten suggestion box now overflowed with ideas from operators who finally felt they had a voice. Marcus Alvarez, the weight of a decade lifted from his shoulders, continued his work as a paramedic. He was recently awarded a Civilian Medal of Valor for rescuing a family from a burning car. A newspaper photo showed him standing with his wife and children, his smile genuine and free. The shadows in his eyes were finally gone. And at the Pentagon, a quiet but significant change took place. Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova, for her courage in exposing deep-seated corruption at great personal risk, received a meritorious promotion to the rank of commander. It was an almost unprecedented leap for a JAG officer of her age. A few weeks after the promotion ceremony, she drove alone to Arlington National Cemetery. She navigated the endless, silent rows of white headstones until she found the one she was looking for, Leo M. Vance, Petty Officer, U.S. Navy SEAL. She stood before the cold marble, her back ramrod straight. She said nothing. Instead, she carefully unpinned the gleaming silver oak leaf of her new rank from her collar and placed it gently on top of the headstone, letting it catch the afternoon sun. "Promise kept, little brother," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. For the first time in over a decade, she felt a sense of peace. The war was over, but she knew her mission wasn't. Turning away from the grave, her eyes were no longer focused on the past, but on the future. Her new purpose was clear: to forge a military where another Leo Vance would never be sacrificed on the altar of ambition. A force built not on a brittle, false idea of perfection, but on true honor, unwavering integrity, and the sacred promise that no one gets left behind. The woman who had been forged in grief and tempered by justice was now a commander. Heavier responsibilities rested on her shoulders, but her spirit was brighter and stronger than ever. Beneath the clear Virginia sky, a true leader began her walk toward a better future. Her story was just beginning. What did you think of today's story? Your feedback is what keeps this channel going. Please subscribe and hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Every bit of your support means the world. Thank you for listening.